Michael with United Veterans Worldwide today for an interview that I've been waiting for a while, and I had to cancel when I got COVID. And Chad has been very flexible. He represents an incredible social media brand and channel, Mental Joe. And I encourage you to follow the links that I'll put in the description today and like and subscribe to what he's doing and sharing, and look at his clothing brand that's so creative and innovative. And represents our community in so many ways. And so I'm grateful to have Chad on today. Chad, will you share a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. I appreciate you having me on and having the time and holding that space. And I'm Chad McLean. A lot of people call me Joe just because the entanglement of the company name Mental Joe, so I kind of just roll with it. But born and raised in Billings, Montana. I currently reside in Phoenix, Arizona with my wife and two little boys. Grew up in a single family household with a mom, and I was the middle of three kids. I have an older brother and a younger sister. And that's kind of the meat and potatoes right there as far as, where I grew up and, kind of might fall into the place of the family structure, I guess, if you will.
Yeah.
Grew up in Billings and, like I said, grew up in a pretty poor household. I remember standing in line for food and, being on, food stamps and taking the funny money and going down to the store to get milk and eggs, right? Just, you can kind of wrap those childhood traumas into military traumas, into life traumas. And, my dad, unfortunately, I don't think he had all the tools in the toolbox to be probably the father that he wanted to be, but he was an abusive, alcoholic, and that kind of ran in the family if you look back generations upon him. And same thing with my mom. But, I was a C student in high school. I didn't really care much for the academics and stuff. I wasn't your all-star, baseball player, or I wasn't the star quarterback of anything. I was a pretty average Joe kid, just kind of went through life. And I really, I was liked by a lot of people in high school and all that fun jazz. I did really well, but the social or the academic thing wasn't there for me, which led me into my military short career. I still hold probably a little angst and anger at myself for not really buckling down. But then, also as we get into this story, realize at 19 I didn't have those emotional intelligence to make the right decisions, and I didn't really have a mentor. With not having a dad, right, I really thought the military, and it would be kind of a father figure for me, and I'd get mentors and grow and develop there, but just didn't have that, push a little bit harder that a father can give their sons, and so I went in the military, cap and gown. Wasn't even on the ground yet, and I'm off to Fort Benning, Georgia. When I went into the military, I was just a good old Levin bang bang grunt. I was just a grunt, nothing fancy, nothing tied to it. Same thing, didn't care about the ASVAB. I just went in, took it, and knew I needed to pass it to get in. That's about all I did with it. Yep. Got in and, did really well in basic. I was one of those guys that I kind of knew at a young age. You shut your mouth, put your head down, and you'll get rewarded for that. And you just do the job that's in front of you. And through that, I ended up getting awarded an airborne slot. Went to airborne school and did really well there. And then 75th Ranger Regiment came down as, that's the home right there in Fort Benning. They're just about a mile and a half from the airborne school there. And he came down and talked to us. I said, well, I've heard about these Rangers. That sounds kind of cool. Maybe I'm in. And at that point, signed up, and right after airborne school, went down to the 75th Ranger Regiment and went through RIP. Way back in the day, it was Ranger Indoctrination Program. Right now today, I believe it's RAS. And there's differences there. I think now RASP is something like 8 to 10 weeks, with all the holdover and everything combined. I think you're there for a good 2.5 months, right there at regiment. But when I was in, I think it was a 4 to 6 week program. So you're there anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks, depending upon, class graduations and rollbacks and things of that nature. But did really well in RIP. Same thing. I didn't know anything about it. I just put my head down, knew what I had to do, and drove on. And went to 2nd Ranger Battalion after I graduated RIP. And I was at Ranger Battalion, and I want to say about 8 or 9 months in, I was doing really well. I got promoted at Ranger Battalion. I was getting ready to get looked at to move over to Sniper Section to essentially grow there, but with that comes the ability to go to Ranger school. So I was everything was lining up for me. And we did. This is kind of where the I guess you would say life turns. We did a jump into Spokane Fairchild Air Force Base. There, it was a battalion jump. It was an airfield seizure, and it was a night jump. And I ended up burning in, and I was part of the Gustav section, which if people are unfamiliar, it's an 84 millimeter cordless rifle, and so I was in weapons platoon. You carry heavy shit, you jump with heavy shit, and you're after it. And ended up burning in on that jump. And to this day, I always tell people, I don't remember if it was 100 feet or 2 feet or whatever. I just know when I woke up, everything was black and my entire body was numb. I couldn't feel anything from the waist down. And through that, just the haziness of it, ended up getting, back with my squad. And from there, the mission, I know for a fact, the training mission was essentially canceled. I ended up reconnecting with my gunner 3 years ago, and he couldn't believe it. He's like, "Hey man, like we all kind of wondered what happened to you, like where you went and what you did." And so him and I got to talk. We hadn't talked in 20 years. We were almost on the phone for 4 hours. It was crazy.
Amazing.
But what he did is he enlightened me to what really happened on that jump. It was a big training exercise that I believe Ranger Battalion kind of uses to this day, of mass tack jumps. He was telling me how many guys ended up getting med boarded on that jump, and how many others had compound fractures and just really got beat to shit on this jump. And I didn't know it. So the tail of the twist of that story is, as we go through this rabbit hole, is I relived that night doing a ketamine therapy session. And my intention was I always had these repeat issues, whether it was alcohol or sneaking pain pills to feel better, and that just unravels relationships upon relationships. And I started seeing a pattern. I didn't understand what was going on and why I continued to have these patterns. And so through a ketamine therapy session that I went through, one of the intentions was, please, like, show me where things went awry. Like, I don't understand why my life is such a mess, why my brain is all over the place, why I can't function like a normal human being, right? Like, I never saw any crazy combat time and all that kind of jazz. Battalion and being an infantry guy, you see some cool shit anyways, right? But didn't have the big Mogadishu or, any of the big warfighter type stories. And so I didn't think I deserved to even talk about, what happened to me in the military. And I always kind of hid from my service because I was embarrassed by it. But through that ketamine session, it essentially, I relived that night of the jump. And then when I was on the other side of that ketamine session, I started putting the dots together. And I realized, when I blew my back out, that's when I started drinking more. Then I started popping pills. Then I started fighting in the barracks. Then I realized I was spiraling so much to try to be an operator in battalion, right?
Yeah.
That I was on so many pain pills that I was, essentially broke. And the story goes, I was broke and had to call, tried calling my mom. I went to the PX and I stole some phone cards. Back in the day, there was those phone cards that we had, and you had to buy those, and you'd go to the pay phone, and, I was broke, but I knew I was spiraling, and I knew the only person I could talk to would have been my mom, and she could have, at least given me some kind of information to hopefully guide through this part of my life. And I ended up getting caught stealing those cards and went back to Ranger Battalion. You can imagine the stuff that was in store for me. Yep. Right. I ended up getting pulled in front of the whole battalion, or my company, Bravo Company, and in front of the whole company. I remember First Sergeant Grippy, he was our first sergeant, and he essentially pulled me in front of the entire company and said, "Hey, why don't you tell your brother what you did this weekend? And if you want to talk about social suicide in Ranger Battalion, especially in your company, that was it." And you can imagine the stories and the hazing and the things that went on there. And I don't, I'm not going to say they shouldn't have done that. Like, that's part of Ranger Battalion. That's part of the soft community. You got to be able to take that hazing, the abuse, because they want to know, come wartime, come down to the line, they want to know that you are hard enough to make those decisions and move forward and not let it affect you. So when all that kind of went on, I kind of put it in my brain of, I screwed up. I embarrassed my brothers. I embarrassed Ranger Battalion is specifically Bravo Company. And so any hazing or anything I got, I took it on the chin. I just kind of smiled, said, give it to me. I deserve this. And so through that, there's all that kind of went down, and, you can imagine the beration I took from a lot of people. And from there, I just thought I was worthless. And so when I got booted from Ranger Battalion, went down the road to, I don't even think they're in Fort Lewis anymore, but there was just a regular leg infantry unit that was there, and that's kind of where I finished my time. So finished my time in the military, and I got out because I was just embarrassed. I was super embarrassed. My whole goal, right, was like I wanted to be a tip of the spear guy. I really wanted to kind of climb that ladder in that soft community. And when that happened to me at battalion, I figured life was over. I figured I was a bum. I was a loser. I wasn't going to do anything anymore. So my back's jacked up. Why don't I just get out of the military, and I'll just tuck my tail between my legs, and I'll just head home. And so that's kind of the 10,000 foot version of the military career. And, then I go home, and I live in Billings, Montana, where there's, 70, 80,000 people. And, I was pretty well known within the city. People knew me, but, that quickly turns into bar fighting and trying to prove that, you were this tough guy and trying to hold your space. And so I did that, and I just held on to that individual that wasn't me for many, many years, because I think I got hurt so much with military traumas, childhood traumas. I was finally at a point in my life that I wasn't going to take the shit anymore.
Yep.
If you came after me, I was going to make sure I put you in a hurt locker, because if I showed I could abuse you in a bar fight, there's not many people that are going to approach me and want to, mess around with the bull and chain, perhaps. So that's kind of the version, to get people kind of caught up of where I'm at, and we can, except poke and prod me if you want on all that.
Yeah, I definitely will. First impression, Chad, as you share this story, is my heart aches for you in that situation, and I have a lot of empathy for people who maybe didn't have the tools, made some poor choices, but you add on top of that an injury and chronic pain. And not many of us know how to handle chronic pain as it applies to the mind and the body. And so I'm not surprised by the decisions you made. One poor choice led to negative self-talk, which I think you could have recovered in Ranger Bat, but your negative self-talk probably defeated you first.
Yeah.
And I could see a vision of what your career could have been had you stayed and endured and had the tools, but you didn't have the tools. Yeah. And that's not of your own making. When we talk about childhood trauma, and I've interviewed some people here on the channel who have gone through some hellacious childhood trauma, and come out on the other side and are now starting to find those coping skills, those ways to do it healthy. But I'm so glad to see that you have come to the place where you are now, and I know we're going to talk about this healing that's taking place still today. But brother, my hat off to you. It's things that weren't your fault you were dealing with, and you had to learn the hard way, and it sucks that had to be the case. When you say airborne jump, and I think for the global audience who's tuning in, it's jumping out of an airplane about 1,500 feet. And if you're doing a mass exercise, you could have 600 dudes in the air dropping at the same time. And anytime you're falling, and if, like you, Joe and I, myself, are probably bigger guys, we weigh more. He was carrying a lot of heavy gear. When you're falling, if somebody undercuts your chute, it sucks the air out of your chute, and you just drop, right? And they tell you that if you drop and you hit someone's chute, you're supposed to run off of it. You've only got a matter of like 2 to 3 seconds to make a decision before you hit the ground. And it saddens me that happened to you, and so many injuries. My first injury when crossing into the Army and infantry in Ranger School was that jump into Darby. I was carrying so much gear, I got knocked out coming out of the plane. The jump master, JP, and I made the wrong direction on my belt loop, and so my reserve chute popped up and hit me in the face when I exited. Knocked me out, cut my chin all the way down. I came to twisted up in my chute. I been twisted so much that I landed on my head and my shoulder, and man, I was in so much pain. I had a massive head injury, but at the same time, I'm in Ranger School, and it's not like you stop. So the medics drove up to me. They looked at my chin. They're like, it's fine. It just bleeds a lot in the face. Pick up your ruck and get into the woods. And I pushed on for another 2 weeks with a massive headache, nausea. Like, I was just barely hanging on, and had no idea what happened to the shoulder. I tore all the muscles in the back of my shoulder. So in the process of doing all the pull-ups needed to even go to chow hall or whatever else, like, I re-tore everything, and it healed incorrectly. Fast forward, explosions in Iraq, more obstacle courses and special operations. I just destroyed it. So when you say a jump led to some of that initial injury, you and I are the same there, brother. I can relate to that. Now that you've shared this story of childhood trauma, being alone, negative coping habits that lead to a spiral, I just want to say I'm so glad that you're still with us.
I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you.
Because
thank you. Yeah.
Because there are guys who take that same journey, and Chad, that you know, and they are not here with us today.
They are not, and I always, it's almost 5 years, but I say 4.5 years, and I don't like, it sucks to talk about this stuff, but what I've realized, if we don't talk about it, there's other brothers and sisters that are out there, millions of them, that have those same stories and those same thought patterns. They feel like there's no one else that's out there. They feel like they're alone, right? So as much as I hate talking about that section of my life, I know that it vibrates throughout several communities for people to kind of look in and peek in and go, okay, maybe my story isn't as bad as I think it is, right? And so through kind of learning that stuff, and again, jumping into what I'm going to call your psychedelic therapies, it's really helped me to kind of zoom out, connect those dots, and understand this stuff, and understand, same thing, I didn't have all the tools. I know I could have been there, because I know when I was at my regular infantry, I had guys that went to combat, and they're like, dude, you're the kind of guy that's built for this. Like, don't leave, like, reboot. Like, if we have to go find a school or try to get you an opportunity to go back to Ranger School or selection, like, we will get that into your contract. But, I was such a broken and beat up mentally, at that time, 21-year-old, that I was just like, I'm going back home, man. I'm just a loser. Because it just sat with me, and it sat with me for years and years and years. And something you talk about your jump. How many millions of other dudes and gals that are out there that have something similar that they've been hiding it? And, my pain pill stuff, I don't want to call it an addiction, but I would take it. Like, I knew when the back acted up, boom, I'm popping pain pills because I got to go on a road march, or I got to go on a run. But then that turns into, now I'm going to keep popping these. I'm going to add alcohol. And like you said, one decision leads to another. And it's just, you just spiral.
Yep. But so why are you still with us? How did you survive that isolation, that negative coping, and still come back?
Yeah, so 4.5 years ago, sorry, I diverted there a little bit, and that's what I'm saying, I get on these little tangents.
We all do.
Roughly 4.5 years ago, in May, I almost took my life 4.5 years ago. I was standing, eye to eye with the wife, had a Springfield in the hand, and there was tension on the trigger, and it's sitting there, and it's aimed at the head, and I always say there was like a pause moment. Because I felt, now that I can zoom out, I felt probably in that mindset that I was in. If something was said, I think I was 1 foot off the cliff. If something was said, I think the rest of that tension is pulled and I'm not here. But everything paused. And from that, I was right here in this hallway, and I walked right through this door and ended up aiming it at the ground and shucking that, 9 mil back, and a round pops out. I dropped the magazine. I just got sick to my stomach, realizing how close that was. To this day, the bullet sits here. It's a stark reminder of just, hey, how quickly one decision can really turn everything. And at that time, my boys were 3 and 1. So they wouldn't have had a father. I wouldn't see them where they're at as little human beings today. But yeah, so that night, again, almost 4.5 years ago, when that happened, I ended up grabbing the pistol and going and putting it back in the safe. And as I'm doing that, and I walk by my wife and I look at her and she's on the phone with the sheriff's department. And I walked straight outside. I sat on the back of my truck tailgate and I waited because I knew it was coming. And, these guys, they come up and, they've got guns drawn, because they get an APB or the radio of, hey, there's a weapon involved. And
Yep.
proceed with caution.
Yep.
And, fortunately for me, these three, I think it was 3 out of the 5 sheriffs that showed up were Ranger Battalion guys.
No way.
Yeah, and just out of, I had my Ranger back shirt on, my second back shirt, I had my scroll shirt on. And so these guys come up and they're like, brother, what are you doing? I go, I don't know where I'm at. Like, I need help. Like, and the one guy's, hey, I was at first. Hey, I was at third. Hey, I was, in regiment training.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. So these guys come in, and so they're like, dude, we're going to get you some help. We're going to call an ambulance, and we're going to get you to inpatient. And so they took me, and I went to inpatient. I like to call it the cuckoo bin because I think people put a real quick picture to the cuckoo bin. And I sat in there for a week, and while I was in there, I would have conversations with my wife, every once in a while on the phone, and she's like, what is going on with you? I was like, I don't know. Something's not right. I don't know what it is. Like, my brain is essentially fried. I was like, I don't understand why I think the way I do. And so Carrie deep dived, and she ended up finding ketamine. And she's like, hey, are you open to this? And I was like, at this point, I don't care. I don't care what it is.
Yeah.
I need to try something different. I'm tired of being on SSRIs and hiding pain pills and drinking, and I've got to change. Like, this was the rock bottom.
Yep.
And so I get out, and not even a month later, I'm sitting in for ketamine therapy. And going through that process was a process. I'm very open about it. And I tell people I went to 5, I think a total of 6 clinics here in the Phoenix Valley. And so that's why, as we talk about this, I'm such a big advocate for that space to be held and held correctly. It's because I went through a lot of these clinics where they plug you in, Michael. They shut the curtain and, good luck on your journey and let us know how you do. Mm. And so with that, you're stuck going through all these different scenarios, in a different multi-universe, being, under. And now you got to learn to try to connect those dots on your own. But as I've gone through this, I've been able to integrate and slow down and look at things in a different context. Hence why I love the verbiage of zoom out. I've literally had to pause times, zoom way out, stand out, and I can see where different aspects of my life have all kind of converged, and where these different connections and different flows of people that have entered my life have really helped me kind of, bridge that gap from Chad 1.0 to now there's a different Chad 2.0. And anybody that's known me, I'm going to say in the last 6 years, because that would have given them an insight to old Chad, they'll all tell you, like, I'm a completely different human being, and all for the positive. This month I've been off all SSRIs for 2 years. I haven't touched any kind of a pain pill in probably 3 years. Alcohol used to be such a hurdle for me. Now I can have a glass of whiskey with a steak with the wife, and it doesn't affect anything. It's, nope, I had my glass, I'm good, I don't need it anymore. So things have changed exponentially for me, in the sense of even, I look at food different. I look at working out different. I was almost close to 300 pounds, back in the day. People that follow us on Instagram, it's one I have posted on our Instagram, that every time I open that up, I see what I call Fat Chad in a little coat. I see that guy that was there, and I'm like, no. So now I'm in a place that now I can give myself some grace and say, okay, hey, like, there are other ceilings to be broken with you, but we have to do it one foot at a time. So,
Chad, thanks very much for sharing and being so open to that hard experience. And you could see my reaction when you're saying it, because I've been there, and it was almost around that same time 4.5 years ago, and I heard a voice in my head as I had it in my hand, and it said, call your wife. And I said, no. And then another voice came and said, call your religious leader, your bishop, call him. I said, no. And then it came one more time and said, call your wife. And for some reason, I just speed dialed it. And I told her I was in trouble and I had my gun. And she says, put the gun on the floor and drive home. I don't care if cops are chasing you. Speed as fast as you can to get here to the house, right? And saved my life. It's a scary scenario when everything's pushing to do it. And there's that last little hinge that's like, don't. Yeah, and what a rough one, right?
Yeah, no, and thank you for sharing that, being vulnerable. And like I said, we all right here, you had two guys talking about this stuff. We don't realize how similar our stories really are. Now, there's obviously different nuances and all that jazz that comes with it, but very similar, and kind of like you said with the pause, and you kind of heard this little voice. I think kind of the same thing. There was a pause with me of kind of like, dude, this isn't what you want to do. It was almost like I said, it was almost like a matrix, right? Like I felt like I was floating. And I could kind of see the scenery and being like, almost like an outer body experience. And I'm not a woo-woo guy. I'm not a real religious guy, but I'm very more, spiritual. And, we are one, we are connected and all that. And I'm okay with how anybody wants to label these things.
Sure.
But I do believe that there is some kind of divine intervention or some guardian angel or, God that is watching over us. But it's up to us to pick up those signs, understand those signs, and then pivot based upon the information that's been given to us, right?
Yep.
And for me to understand this stuff, my brain was so wackadoodle that the psychedelics and ketamine has really catapulted me to being this greater understanding and better human being all the way around.
Yeah, that's a story that I'm hearing quite consistently with people I'm interviewing. I'm doing about 6 interviews a week right now with global veterans, and I'm hearing about this ketamine journey. I'm hearing a lot about transitioning off of pharmaceutical drugs, SSRIs and everything, and pushing more into CBD for pain management.
Yep.
And my advocacy in the future will probably go towards the CBD option for pain management for everybody. Keeping people active off the couch and still functioning. But I'm so glad that your wife was inspired to use that type of a process to get you to some places of healing. And I saw a post this morning. Maybe it was 2 posts from you this morning. One was, how many people have you affected and changed? Oh, look at that thumbs up. Yeah.
I love it.
and all of these different quotes of people who say that you have impacted their life, brother. That's something huge. And then a guy with an accent who talked about your clothing brand and bringing America some hope. And I can't help but just smile and be grateful for people like that encourage us forward in this journey with our community. And I want you to share more about what you're doing. So can you take us forward now and say, here's where you're at, here's where Chad's at now, and what's happening with this advocacy and with your brand? Let's talk through it.
You got it. So rewind a little bit. So roughly about my 7th or 8th ketamine session, and again, I hate putting weird words to it because people go, oh, okay, I get it, you weirdo. But, kind of, I don't know if you want to call it a vision, but I had something kind of come to me of, go start an apparel company. And prior to this, I was in corporate real estate for almost 20 years. So I knew nothing about apparel, right? I've always loved swag. I've always, been that guy that had the cool golf polos, the whole 9 yards, right? Yep. But didn't understand why. But as I started continuing these ketamine sessions, we really started connecting the dots. Oh, well, we can use apparel to talk about mental health, but we can also do it in a fun manner that talks about the non-traditional in psychedelics and other modalities like breath work and things of that nature, right? And so I started, okay, well, apparel is big. People always wear stuff. It's, you're essentially a billboard to start a conversation.
Yep.
All right, screw it. Let's start an apparel company. And so through that, I started designing our website, and I started learning manufacturing. I filed for my LLC, and we filed for our nonprofit. And so as this vision starts coming together, then more and more things start making sense. Like, well, if you think about nonprofits, a lot of nonprofits are standing there with their hands out saying, we need money to go do our mission. right?
Hey, can I hold you just a second, Chad? My dog is scratching on my door.
You're good.
Okay, come in. Over here. All right. Good gracious, dog. My wife's shooting the nail gun, and the dog's getting freaked out. So.
Oh, freaked out.
Yeah.
That's all right. That's all right.
So you're saying you started the nonprofit?
Yes, we started this nonprofit, and kind of the aha to me was, well, if you think about it, a lot of nonprofits, we're standing out there with our hands out to get money to go do our mission.
Yep.
Right? And I'm like, okay, well, what if we're a self-sustainable nonprofit? And Apparel is what we create the community and the message with. But as we grow, the apparel and the profit turns in profit for a purpose. Kind of like Tom on shoes, I guess you would say, right? But, more on the apparel side. So now we're building a community with what we're talking about. And now we're creating some profit that maybe we can send people to ketamine clinics or retreats. And we really hold that space. Like, we're open to all mental health modalities, but I'll always argue with people, if you look at the traditional way that we have approached mental health, we wouldn't be in the circumstances or the issues that we see today. If traditional mental health really worked, we wouldn't be at a suicide rate of 22 to 44 a day.
Yep.
Right? And and the reason I use such a broad scope on that, because there are some reports that say it's 44 a day, some reports saying, on average it's 17 a day. So I try to use a broad scope, but then we don't even talk about first responder deaths. And we don't talk about your average Joe deaths. Right? And
exactly.
So you roll all that in there, you're looking anywhere from 60 to 100,000 Americans a year killing themselves because of mental health, and that's just stuff we know that's reported.
Not a year, a day.
Yeah, that's just stuff that we're talking about that's reported.
Yep.
And so I'm very open about this. I'm very brash about it. And like I said, I'm a Montana kid. I grew up on the DARE program. Drugs are bad, but once I start removing myself from the matrix of the everyday life and, government propaganda kind of stuff, is I really started diving into this stuff and understanding, psilocybin mushrooms, LSD, ayahuasca, ibogaine, and you're like you said, you're starting to hear this vibrate throughout the veteran community that they're going to Mexico to sit for an ayahuasca ceremony, or they're going to Peru for, mushrooms or an LSD, and these individuals are coming back with profound experiences of changing them for the good. A lot of, Sean Ryan talks about it on his podcast, and all those other Navy SEALs and Special Forces guys that talk about this stuff. So that's why for me, like, when we created the brand, is like, okay, like, we know we're going to be talking about two different things that no one wants to talk about: mental health and non-traditional ways of healing. Like, I get it. We're fighting up a hill. And it's been rough at times. There's definitely been times that I've wanted to quit, right? Because I'm a one-man band. My wife jumps in and helps when she can, but she's, holding down the fort with a full-time job. And so a lot of it leans on me to, how do I structure this nonprofit? How do I get people on the board to really help us? And, what about these manufacturers? And, well, I got to wait for this because they haven't made a hat. And so there's a lot of robbing Peter to pay Paul budget to continue to push forward. But kind of bring it back to what you were saying with the post of the reason we continue to push is just because of that. We get people weekly that reach out and say, Chad, because you shared your story and you were vulnerable, or, you talked about these things, I was on the fence too. And now that I've gone through my psilocybin journey, I definitely understand what you mean by, brain fog is gone and that you've leveled up as a human being. And so those people that, reach out to Carrie and I with those messages of, hey, thank you for this. You saved my husband's life, or thank you for this. My uncle's here because of you today. Those are the things that help us keep pushing forward, right? That's part of the journey. That's part of the story, and one, character building for me, right? And so Mental Joe is, we've been around for about 2.5 years now. We're ticking up quite a bit. There's some big things on the, on the stove that we're cooking that's, hopefully going to come to fruition in 2025. But, in a short amount of time, we've got some of our apparel and pro boxers, NFL players, UFC fighters, and a plethora of, our brothers and sisters in the military and the first responder community. And when we started this, like, I hated social media, and again, we're not big, but, I had like 50 followers, and they're more family members than anything. But, now today, I mean, we're almost at 2,800 followers 2 years later.
Yep.
It's all organic. We haven't paid for any marketing. Like, it's all been word of mouth. And so those are the things that tell me, like, we're headed in the right direction.
100%.
Do we need to pivot here and there on some of our apparel to bring a bigger audience in? Absolutely. Hence, like, you see this new hat we got. It just says gratitude, right? Super clean, not psychedelic-ish, but you still get the mission. If you come to our page, you understand what we're trying to accomplish.
Scotty wears it.
Yes, he does. Yeah. So Scotty, believe it or not, this is Scotty's hat here, the grateful hat, right? So Scotty's got that. And so when I was talking with Scotty, that was kind of one of our things. It was like, again, another aha moment for me, right? It's like Scotty's healing came through music. He loves what Mental Joe is doing, but he hasn't really sat with medicine. But at the same time, he wants to support us. So that's where let's come in with some cleaner version type stuff. So people can support us and they don't feel like, well, I don't want to wear the crazy mushroom shirt, but I love what Chad's doing.
Yeah.
Right. So learning to pivot, and talk to a broader audience for sure. But that's where we're at with Mental Joe right now.
Yeah, good stuff. Well, feel free to use me as a sounding board going forward. I've been involved in businesses and structuring and branding and manufacturing and logistics, and so feel free to just use me. I'm a free resource to you, brother. You want to bounce ideas off me and growth ideas? Let me help you out.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, I salute you for that. When you talk about having a vision of sorts that guides you into a new path, you've never considered apparel brand of your own. And suddenly this inspiration comes. And like you said, see it however you want to see it. I always associate those types of inspiration, that voice in my head, to God reaching out to me and saying, hey, you're worth it. Let's do something different. And 2 years ago, I had this inspiration in the middle of COVID that kind of said, global veterans are suffering. I've been blessed to have, even though I fought the VA for many years for my benefits, to get the benefits I've got, that's a great security to my family for the rest of my life. And I know that there are global veterans who don't have anything like that. And they're fighting proxy wars for us in different countries, in Somalia, etc., and come back injured, and society shuns them for those injuries and disabilities. And I want to make an impact for them in their lives. I want to go back and start grassroots efforts to show them that there's a path forward, and to fight for benefits and fight for their rights, and to have some pride in their service, right? So, and that's kind of why I started. And it took me 2 years of self-doubt and frustration to make that first video. And I've saved that first video. I've never posted it because it is terrible.
That's all right. One of these days you got to post it, though.
Yeah, it was so bad. And then a buddy of mine said, hey, keep going, reach out, make more. And the more I've done it, the more I've become more comfortable, and now it's in motion. It's like it's an upward slide. It's just moving.
Yeah, it's having faith, right? It's trusting in the process. And again, I grew up Catholic, and through that time, again, religion just kind of, I've got my own quirks about it, if you will.
Sure.
And again, going through the academy, I think it gave me a resurgence of, faith again.
Yeah.
The same thing. There's things I wanted to stop with Mental Joe. I didn't think I was making an impact. But again, I get these reminders from people that reach out to us. But through that, when I've wanted to quit, there has been little nudges and things that kind of jump into my life that I'm like, call them God winks or aha moments, right? And I'm like, all right. And again, people, right, they'll put the label of, I'm praying. But for me, it's like I pause and I have the internal talk of, okay, I see you. I hear you. All right. Gotcha. I'll stay on the mission. I'll put my head down. Yes, it sucks right now, but I know there's a reason for this suck. And that's part of the journey, right? Yep. People want to see the journey, the character building of who I was to where I'm going, and then what I'm bringing along with me. So
100%.
It's a very renewed found in faith that I've probably never really had in my entire life. And I really chalk a lot of it up to psychedelics and reopening up those neural pathways so I can look at things differently.
Good for you, Chad. Good for you. No, I'm so happy for that, and I'm so glad that you got on the channel today and shared some of your story with us. And I know there's more to come. The journey's continuing, and
Absolutely.
I'm very excited for you. And I wrote a note down here. I've got to get some of your apparel and start to wear it on my interviews instead of something like this. I got to wear one of your things.
You let me know, dude. You let me know what you're interested in. I'll just get you a little swag bag. I'll hook you up, dude. So,
yeah, well, I'll buy something too because I want to support you and what you're doing as well.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah. In the last couple minutes here, Chad, I wondered if you can share some advice for people who are tuning in, be it military, first responder, or civilians who have gone through their own trauma, childhood trauma, etc. You know, the world's language is really common when we speak trauma. It's more common now than ever before, and it will, sadly, it will increase. So what can you speak to these people who have gone through trauma? What advice can you give?
You know, I would just tell people, realize that there's so much commonality between all of us, you know, in our stories, and stop telling yourself the negativity within your head, right? Like, realize that there is help out there. Realize that there are people that care about you, and that it's okay to talk about, you know, this stuff and your traumas and vent it out and get rid of it. And if we just rip labels off this stuff and realize, you know, especially us men, that, hey, like, we can still beat our chest and be the silverback gorilla in the jungle, but it's okay to soften that approach, you know, that kind of warrior in the garden approach.
Yep, exactly.
And I just tell people, like, talk about this stuff. Find that one or two buddies that you can confide in that'll tell you that you are worth this, and there is more, and tomorrow is a better day, you know. So I always say it's a bad day, not a bad life, right? You know, tomorrow's a new start. And if you're going through those seasons of you know, having those horrible thoughts, realize it's a season, it's a moment in time, you know, let that go, sit with it, feel it, try to understand it, and then realize, hey, tomorrow's a better day. So if you're going to sit on the couch and finish off your bad day with a bag of Doritos, don't beat yourself up too long and don't eat the full bag. But know tomorrow's a new start, you know?
Yeah, I love that advice. You know, the sun will always come up. The day the sun doesn't come up, then start to worry. But a new day comes every day, and the cold of the night will bring the warmth of the sun in the morning, and there's always hope. Chad,
Absolutely.
Thanks very much, brother. I sure appreciate you joining us today, and I hope to have more interactions in the future.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the time, man. I appreciate being here.
All right, brother.
All right, man. Bye.